So since I did a easy little podcast review of Final Fantasy 1 after I finished playing the Pixel Remaster version on this channel, I'll just do the same thing for Final Fantasy 2 since I finished that as well. So like Final Fantasy 1, this was my first ever time beating Final Fantasy 2. In fact, I can go even farther the first time because Final Fantasy 1 I had owned a copy on NES since I was a little kid, since after I played Final Fantasy 2, aka 4, it was called 2 at the time. On Super Nintendo, I wanted to get more, so we got the Final Fantasy NES, and I couldn't play it because of the non-retargeting of monsters after one gets killed and you're attacking. Nevertheless, I have at least played through that and maybe the Dawn of Souls version up through maybe the Earth Cave or so I got a little ways into it. Final Fantasy 2, on the other hand, this was functionally a brand new experience. I think I might have messed around literally for like 15 minutes with it on an NES emulator at some point, playing a translator version, but I don't know, this was basically entirely a brand new experience for me. I never played through it much before. I also had that on Dawn of Souls, but I think when I got Dawn of Souls, I wanted to play through them in a row. I wanted to play through Final Fantasy 1, then 2, but I just kind of my playthrough again through Final Fantasy 1 stalled out at the time. What would it be, 20 years ago that Dawn of Souls came out when I was in high school, so I guess I just didn't have enough time to squeeze in the games I wanted to play. So I don't think I ever even booted up the Final Fantasy 2 on Dawn of Souls, even though I've owned it for like 20 years. But anyway, now Pixel Remaster, I did in fact play through the whole game, and I like Final Fantasy 1. I did it I played through it pure or kind of vanilla style. I never changed the encounter rate using the Pixel Remaster's options. Didn't change the gold or the experience, or I guess whatever Final Fantasy 2 version of experience is. Didn't mess with any of that. I did leave on the feature they automatically had on, which was automatically increasing characters' hit points by every 10 battles or something like that. That was automatically on when you boot up the game, so I just left it. And I also used some of the quality of life things Pixel Remaster added, namely the mini maps, the auto battling, etc. But yeah, other than that, I didn't mess with anything in terms I played through it all kind of a classic style, although I'm quite positive this is infinitely easier than the original NES version was, if only for the autosave. And I basically did every single thing in the game, although the amount of optional content seems pretty minimal to me, so I don't know if that's saying all that much. I know that some of the previous versions added on super dungeons and super bosses they actually removed for this version, which, to be honest, I'm okay with it, because by the time I was done with the game, I was kind of ready to be done, because I admit that I didn't necessarily play Final Fantasy 2 in the most optimal way, which is because I was trying to play through it. At this point in my life, I don't much enjoy kind of binge gaming. I don't enjoy the kind of unhinge your jaw and shove the whole game in it sort of a style of play. It just doesn't appeal to me as much these days. But so I spent probably a week and a half, maybe, like probably 10, 12 days, something like that, playing through the game about like 45 minutes to an hour a day, missing a day sometimes here and there. Probably got, maybe 6-7 hours into it that way. Then I realized that it was about May 9th or so, and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was coming out in like 3 days, so I was like, I'm probably not gonna want to play this after Tears of the Kingdom comes out. So I just need to beat this. So then I did in fact unhinge my jaw and play for like 4 hours a day for all the subsequent days, and basically just rush through the rest of the game really quick. And for a lot of people, probably playing 4 hours a day is pretty standard, but not my ideal way to play a game. Not really. So I didn't necessarily have the most enjoyable experience with the latter 3/4 of the game probably, but that's how I did it. And I will confess that I didn't follow along with a guide per se in terms of like boss strategies, dungeon maps, just hand holding you through the whole thing. I mostly tried to work my way through it and figure things out in terms of what spells I should buy, how to do the strategy of the game, beating all the bosses, etc., figuring out the occasionally annoying to figure out and lengthy and maze-like dungeons. So I did pretty much all that on my own, but I did kind of peek at a guide a few times to help me along, because the game has this progression that almost reminded me of like those old Sierra Quest games, like King's Quest or Quest for Glory or whatever, where there's like these dialogue trees you have to navigate with various characters around the world map. You don't always know where they are, and ask them or talk to them about specific things or show them specific items to make the plot advance, which was not always clear what you were supposed to go next. Usually you could kind of work your way in the right direction by going back to your home base where Princess Hilda was at first, which the town changed halfway through the game, but kind of reminded me a little bit of how you had that kind of home base of what castle, what was it called in Dragon Quest 1? Tantagel, something like that. So yeah, usually you could maybe go back there, talk to Hilda, but there was other points where it was a little more obscure, so I was like, I'm not looking to spend hours retracing the whole world map, talking to everyone before I find the right person I need to talk to proceed. So I'm going to just peek at a guide to tell me where I need to go to keep this plot going. So, yeah, but anyway, so plot. And it's a surprisingly kind of straightforward plot compared to a lot of other Final Fantasies. Not in the way of like not particularly convoluted, but in the way of there's not a ton in the way of kind of like magic crystals, ancient prophecies, old magic, gods or malevolent spirits. The 90% of the game is mostly kind of a kingdom versus empire sort of battle in a fantasy world, but only a fantasy in the sense that like monsters exist and magic is used, but more kind of not in a like deep magic, mysterious way. Like I said, gods and prophecies. More just magic is used as a weapon to shoot lightning bolts and fireballs. But yeah, the plot mostly revolves around these two forces, the Kingdom of Finn, I think it was called, and the Empire, led by the Emperor, very creatively named, from the castle that, what was it initially called? Palamecia, is that what it was? It eventually becomes Pandemonium, but anyway. So the plot mostly just involves around like the bad guy taking over castles, falling back, insurgencies, attacking and retaking enemy territory, disabling enemy weapons like the dreadnoughts, seeking out stronger weapons, and sometimes it's very literal, like you get a quest to seek out mithril to make mithril weapons, and it's not like a magic plot token that advances things. Just once you get them, you just equip them and your attack goes up, So it's almost like almost reminds me more kind of some grittier type dark medieval, like a military fantasy, like battles and resurgences and that kind of thing. It's kind of straightforward in that way, at least until the final act of the game, when suddenly a hell and the castle of hell and the emperor attaining the powers of hell comes in the mix. Then we bring in the true mystical fantasy elements, right? But for most of it, it's almost kind of falls more in the kind of a military fantasy genre more than anything else. Like magic monsters exist, but it's not so much in the way of like the alternate dimensions we get in Final Fantasy V, or the Esper world in Final Fantasy VI, or even like the moon and its magical powers, and Bahamut and the Lunarians in Final Fantasy IV. It's more kind of straightforward, and we even actually have characters this time, which technically the last game did. Final Fantasy I, like there was Princess Sarah, Garland, the four fiends, the elements, a couple others, whatever that witch with the one eye and the cave up north was named, but most of them had extremely minimal characterization, like most of them had like literally a few text boxes in the whole game at most. Garland was one of the only ones you met more than once, and most of the villains are just kind of mwahaha, so evil, etc. But here there's more characters that you actually meet many times over, such as Princess Hilda, I named, Prince Gordon, who kind of has a character arc where he goes from cowardly to leading the armies. Minwu, who also has a character arc of sorts, going from kind of the cleric of this rebellion to eventually who revives you at the beginning, to eventually sacrificing himself to attain a not overwhelmingly useful ultimate magic spell. We'll talk about that later. Ricard, the Dragoon, Cid, lots of characters who have kind of heroic sacrifices or deaths, And so just that little bit of personality does make a big difference for me. The actual lead characters are still pretty underdeveloped. I couldn't tell you much about Furion or Maria or Guy's, quirks, likes, flaws, foibles, backstories, so on, except that Guy, for whatever reason, talks like a caveman, or should I say talk like caveman, He leaves out prepositions and words like that, and it's interesting to give him caveman grammar. I don't quite know what that's about, but Furion and Maria couldn't tell you much about, other than that Maria's brother Leon is the one who kind of goes bad and then good again. But they're not quite on the level of depth of a Cecil from, or is it Cecil from Final Fantasy IV, or Terra from Final Fantasy VI, or Cloud from FF7. But even the tiny little bits we get, those tiny little bits and those minor supporting characters throughout the game, just give it the extra oomph of personality that does put it over FF1 for me in that regard. Even if I respect FF1 kind of for doing a good job establishing the world of Final Fantasy and having like the 4 crystals and 4 fiends, etc. Speaking of those, I do think that the villains here are a little bit underdeveloped. Like, for example, the Emperor I mentioned, yeah, it just could have used a little bit more. Definitely that one, can't even remember his name off the top of my head, but that one captain who switches sides, who's said to have betrayed the good guys for the Empire. Could have used more showdowns with him, and more showdowns with Leon. Kind of Leon's little arc reminded me a lot of Kain from Final Fantasy IV. Kind of he's on the bad side, then the good side again, switching back and forth. Definitely felt like the precursor to that, but yeah, I could have used just a little bit more for the Emperor. A little more screen time, a little more quirks. Not even necessarily as colorful as like a Kefka, but even something like a Galbez and the 4 Fiends in Final Fantasy IV. Just some villains we could meet and then defeat later on. So I could use a little bit more there, but even so, the Emperor still had more going for him than Garland in Final Fantasy I, so we're on the right path here. What else to talk about before gameplay? Well, I guess also in kind of the same very broad category of presentation as the story, we talk about the graphical presentation. I'll be honest, possibly controversial, but I don't know, it's just where I stand. I find the 3 original NES versions of the 3 Final Fantasy games to be a little bit hard to look at. I just find them a little bit ugly. Just Squaresoft hadn't quite figured it out, I feel like, in the NES era, in the same way that some other companies like Capcom and Konami had. But that said, I think the graphical presentation in the Pixel Remaster is absolutely lovely if you like that kind of thing, which I do. Some of the temples and dungeons can get a bit samey, but the towns always look great to me in these Pixel Remasters so far. Like, yeah, FF1 and FF2. I haven't played 3 yet, but these towns, yeah, they look great. They have that perfect Super Nintendo JRPG feel, and some of the dungeons did look a little bit the same. The final castle, Pandemonium, I believe it was called, that had a sufficiently epic, climactic, grand look to it. That really nailed it, and the graphical presentation and the music. And the music in general was solid. The overworld theme, not quite as good as some of the 3 Super Nintendo ones, which, as I said, are 3 of my favorite games of all time. But I saw the town theme, very calming, and the battle theme in particular. The boss themes weren't too impactful for me. They didn't really get stuck in my head the way boss themes could. In fact, I couldn't really hum a bar of them right now for you if my life depended on it. They just didn't stand out that much. On the other hand, the main battle theme, it was just absolutely stuck in my head. By the time I was done playing Final Fantasy II, I was going around my day-to-day activities just like humming it, just going do 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 do. It's actually an improvement on Final Fantasy I's battle theme to me, and in some ways you could maybe argue it's better than the ones in FF4 and FF5, which I don't say lightly if you know how much I love those games. But yeah, the do 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 do. That's a little work of melodic genius there, and the remixes of it were very good. And I guess also in kind of the broad category of presentation, related to story, not exactly the same, but related would be kind of lore. And you do have to give Final Fantasy II a lot of credit for what it did there. There's a ton of stuff. There's a ton of invention in this game that, even if it doesn't mean much going back to it after later games, you do have to acknowledge that it played at almost as significant role as of building the Final Fantasy world as Final Fantasy I. I'm talking about the Dragoons, the Chocobos, the bombs in the classic, the red little round enemies, other enemies like, I don't know, the Marlboros or something, Sid, we have an engineer, an airship master named Sid. Yeah, and of course the magic point system, that's more of a gameplay mechanic than lore, but yeah, but just all those things, I think not much is really missing here, and what I would kind of see as what would become kind of the Final Fantasy formula, like Moogles, but that's about it. Like, yeah, most of like Final Fantasy has been established by this point. From Black Mage to Dragoons to 4 crystals to, in this game, Chocobos and Sid and airships in both games. So yeah, this game that I've, was a mysterious thing for literal decades that I knew very little about. Looking back on it, there's a ton here in building Final Fantasy. On the other hand, and let us switch over and talking gameplay here. So I think when you look at the gameplay mechanics here, you can definitely see kind of a road not traveled in the way that the gameplay mechanics work. And you don't need me to be the 10,000th person to do a YouTube video where I talk about the how every stat and every weapon use and every spell levels up through individual use, and how kind of strange and unwieldy it is to some extent. In doing the few minutes of research to kind of look at this, record this little video, a lot of people compared it to the Saga games, apparently from Squaresoft, that someone who worked in this game worked on, and it uses similar mechanics. I don't know anything about that, but what I do know about, and my mind immediately compared it to, was Secret of Mana, which is another game where every character had their own level for each weapon type and each spell. And I even have similar memories in Secret of Mana, particularly I think in the Snow Town, of just going in and out of town and blasting every enemy with spells, going back in, repeating, blasting spells, to then going to the end when I run out of magic points to level up spells. It's a similar vibe here, where you want to level up your magic through using it over and over again. Now, I will say that as far as I can tell, there is almost literally, I mean, I shouldn't say almost, because I mean, I don't know about the other versions of the game that have optional hard dungeons and super bosses, but at least in terms of my playthrough and what I know about the game in terms of the version that the Pixel Remaster is, where the Emperor is the hardest thing in the game, I feel like I could say pretty with good authority that there is zero utility whatsoever to trying to make diverse black mages in this game. What you should really do is just pick one attack spell for each character and just have them do nothing but cast that spell the whole game. And I frankly regret doing otherwise, because I was going into the final dungeon with some characters having like level 5 and level 6 attack spells that were basically useless. And really, Maria, I trained a couple of spells up to level 10 for her, but really what I should have just done is put fire on one of them, maybe Fury on, ice on Maria, lightning on Guy, and just use nothing but those the whole game, so that I have like level, like 13 or 14 spell for each of them by the end that would be powerful against the endgame monsters. Yeah, it didn't work that well, because Furion, I admit I didn't do much magic for him at all. It's maybe my old Final Fantasy brain thinking like the main character shouldn't be your magic user. But Guy, I had like your 3 main spells and a few others, like up to level 6 and 5, 6, 7. But like I said, that's pretty much useless at the end game. Maria, fortunately, I had like Fire, Holy, and Ultima, I think, like level 10, which did pretty well, but I think I would have rather just had like Fire or Blizzard level 13. So I'm just going to say, if you play through this game, do not make diverse black mages. Just give one spell to each person and have that be your spell the whole game. On the other hand, I will acknowledge that a diverse set of white magic is pretty useful. Give everyone Cure, use it frequently, have a powerful Cure across the party, and have at least one person have a decent level on Asuna, the poison healing spell, and a life, and have a little bit of haste and berserk ready to go too, because that does increase attack a lot. But yeah, so everyone in this game can dual wield weapons, which is interesting. I didn't know about that. And I'll say straight up, once I figured that out, I never again through the entire game bothered putting a shield on anyone, ever. Shields were not a part of my playthrough, nor were bows. Everyone was in the front row. Everyone was loaded up with the best axes, swords, and spears, dual wielding that I could get. And like I said when I reviewed Final Fantasy 1 recently, the physical attacks outpaced magic for the overwhelming majority of the game, to where I would be frustrated trying to even use magic with Maria, trying to make her into a black mage, because I would be doing 600, 700 damage with a spell. As soon as I switch over to just using attack with her, suddenly now I'm doing like 1300 damage between my 2 attacks. Now, like Final Fantasy 1, where I said I finally found some use for magic for literally the last few boss battles in the game, similarly here, some of the Golem or Gygus enemies or whatever, in kind of the last couple dungeons, I finally started getting some use out of magic that did better than physical attacks against them. And the fight against the final boss, the Emperor himself, I was glad to have Maria casting those level 10 ultimates, because that did serve a pretty good purpose in carving away his hit points. But for like 99.5% of battles that I did throughout the course of the game, yeah, magic was not particularly useful, and physical attacks easily outpaced it. And yeah, because everyone has the ability to learn every spell and can equip every weapon and every armor, the characters kind of seem to blur together, mechanically throughout the game, which is admittedly the case for most Final Fantasy games, at least the ones I've played. Think about like Final Fantasy VI. Everyone, granted, Edgar has tools, Sabin has Blitz, etc., etc. But once you get the magic available and you can start getting, your really high level magic on everyone, then the specificities between them start to kind of blur out. Final Fantasy V, everyone is obviously a blank slate. Final Fantasy VII with materia, so it's not a unique problem if I have two of the characters kind of blur together. That's true of, I think, most games besides ones with a really rigid progression and party system like Final Fantasy IV. But yeah, like I said, I did kind of make Maria the mage. I don't know if you call that some subtle sexism on my part, being like your chick has to be the magic user. I don't know. You can get mad at me for that, I guess. But like I said, when I dropped the magic and just had her hit stuff, it was almost always more useful. But yeah, like I said, if I ever play through this game again, I'm just going to pick one spell for everyone and just have them use it frequently through the dungeon, so I have some like level 13 magic going into the end game. But yeah, like I said, the magic was worth it, at least for kind of those golems and Gygases and a few other odds and ends, some of those enemies in chests in Pandemonium. Now, one last note about the battle system. Some of the effects, not the effects you use on the enemies, which as most games in this series are usually not very useful, because the really powerful enemies you would want to use sleep and stuff on, it usually doesn't work. But the effects that the enemies use on you, very powerful in this game. Like confuse, stone, sleep. Like stone, for example, it's not like some of the later games where it takes like 3 turns to get fully stoned, so to speak, fully petrified. It's a lot of them, these cockatrice enemies, one hit, they can stone a character. I don't think I got a game over for being fully petrified, but I came within a hair's breadth. I think there was one point where I got ambush attacked by like 6 cockatrices, and they petrified 3 characters before I ran away with the last one. I was like, I'm getting out of here. And I did get, unlike Final Fantasy 1 where I got no game overs, I did get a few in this game. A couple in the early game, because I was kind of trying to wander the map and came across some overpowered enemies. But I got a few kind of towards the end game, and a couple in the Pandemonium itself for one specific enemy stat or status that the enemy gives you, which was confuse. It's really powerful in this game. It's hard to break your characters out of it, and I feel like in some of the later games, confused characters are sort of like nerfed, like they don't hit you your party as hard as they hit the enemy. No such, not the case in this one. I would have battles where I got a couple characters confused, and these are characters who between their 2 hits were hitting for like 1,500 hit points at this point, and I had characters with like 2,000 hit points, right? So you can imagine how fast my party slaughtered my party once confused. Just a couple turns, just my own dudes tore the other dudes just to shreds. So I got a couple game overs because of confused, which is crazy, because in later games I never remember being that intimidated, like, oh shit, when a character got confused I was like, oh, just knock him in the head, no big deal. Just kind of an annoyance, but here you could get a game over from getting confused. So that's kind of I don't even say that to complain, it's kind of amusing, I guess. Probably I'd be saying it to complain if I was playing in the version that, like the NES version that didn't have the autosave in the rooms, and I lost like 3 hours of progress in the Jade Passage in Pandemonium through a bout of confusion. But fortunately in this version it never annoyed me too much. It was more an amusement than anything else. Of all the Final Fantasy games I've played, and this is even compared to Final Fantasy 1, which is already primarily dungeon crawler, this is really a dungeon crawler of a game. They are huge compared to later games. Like, just they go on for floors and floors and floors with their almost kind of maze-like structure. Like I said, I did not look at any dungeon maps on my phone or anything while I was playing this game. I did it all kind of authentic style. And these dungeons are full of like these false rooms and multiple paths, these long hallways with really high encounter rates, and I didn't turn off the battle system either. I did everything, which is why I got kind of overpowered by the end game. But yeah, there's so many of these little rooms that are just like distractions. They're empty. And even when I knew there's a 90% chance I was going into one, I still would go into it because occasionally they would have good treasure. But yeah, these dungeons they're really, really big. They go on for floor after floor after floor. Lots of them with so many routes. Like I was just kind of playing around with Final Fantasy IV for just a little bit after I beat this game. Like I was just running around Final Fantasy IV with the encounters turned off, just kind of for fun, just to explore the game. And it was shocking to kind of compare it to Final Fantasy II. Like Final Fantasy IV has tons of dungeons that are like one floor or maybe two, like the initial Mist Cave. You're going up those mountains to turn to a paladin. It's literally like 3 or 4 not particularly big rooms. Going through even the water maze to get back into Castle Baron or whatever felt huge to me as a kid playing it. But compared to the dungeons in Final Fantasy II, I swear it's like not even a quarter of the size of those. Granted, Final Fantasy IV, even like Zeromus' lair in the moon, the final dungeon, I'm positive it's like no more than like half the size of the Jade Passage Pandemonium finale of Final Fantasy II. So yeah, these are huge ass dungeons. You can kind of tell that Square had an initially different, I think, kind of conception of what this series was. It feels like as more, like I said, primarily a dungeon crawler with towns and the overworld kind of more as the breather in between. Maybe this was inspired by the game's kind of initial source as a derivation of the Dungeons & Dragons, kind of a D&D style where you, of course, are exploring dungeons. But it feels like as we got into later games, like I said, I haven't played Final Fantasy III yet, so I can't compare, but certainly in the later games, it feels like as they got more cinematic, they started leaning less on the dungeons, kind of not that they are not prominent, but it's more like maybe 50-50 between dungeons and everything else, aka towns, overworld, cutscenes, exploration. Here, I feel like if you were to take just if I was to record my entire playthrough, start to finish, if you were to take any given frame of my playthrough, just at random, use a random number generator to pick a frame, I'm positive there'd be a 90% chance that the frame you would find would be either me in a battle or in a dungeon. Like only a relatively small sliver of the entire playthrough was anything besides those two things, dungeon or battle. Which isn't to say there aren't occasional cinematic elements, but some reasonably affecting scenes. You know, we got like a Manwë, whatever the white cleric, his name was, his sacrifice, Ricard the Dragoon sacrifice, Cid's death, but mostly the cinematic elements feel a little bit undercooked. Like, for example, there's a part where you go back from one dungeon to your hometown or previous hometown, Altair, was that what it was called? Only to find that several towns around the map, there's just now like this weird rubble where they used to be. And you go up to Castle Finn, which you've retaken, and talk to Princess Hilda, and she informs you about how the Emperor's cyclone has wiped out like a quarter of the villages on the world map and like killed everyone, right? And of course, indeed, there is a cyclone nearby that you have to go in to fight the Emperor. But it's the presentation of it that's a little weird, where you don't hear anything about this happening. You just find the aftermath and then learn about it. I feel like in any future Final Fantasy, I'm not even talking about the 3D ones, I'm talking about even like Final Fantasy VI, for example, the evil overlord summoning this dark magic and like destroying all these towns would be presented as kind of a epic cinematic sequence with dramatic music, just a kind of they'd try to give it a little bit of a horror vibe, like for example the Cataclysm in Final Fantasy VI, or even in Final Fantasy V, there's parts where Exteth is sucking villages into the Void, I believe it's called. But here it's weird. It's like it's this very low-key way that you find the aftermath. The overworld music doesn't change or anything, although you do start to fight tougher enemies in the overworld, which is a neat kind of shift I like. I did kind of take a peek. I just after I finished playing it, I pulled up on YouTube a long play of the Dawn of Souls version and looked through it, and they actually did add some pretty neat cutscenes with like the Empire's dreadnought kind of trying to grab airships out of the sky and stuff. And that was cool, although overall I would say that I do prefer this version's look, the Pixel Remaster, although like I said, I prefer both the original NES version. Overall, I did have fun with the experience. I wouldn't have put in, roughly 17 hours in my playthrough if I didn't have fun. Although it felt a little bit long-winded at times. Like I said, the really long dungeons and the high encounter rate with the battling was like too much of a pretty good thing, you know? Sometimes if a game you're really loving every second of it, you don't mind if it's a little delayed out. Here is more like too much of a pretty good thing. Like think of a meal that's not my favorite, but I like all right. Like, you know, like a rotisserie chicken and scallop potatoes, right? I like that meal. If someone put it in front of me, I'd like to eat it. If someone put 4 pounds of rotisserie chicken and scallop potatoes in front of me and was like, eat this, I'd be like, I don't know, man. Seems like a lot. And that's kind of how I felt about parts of Final Fantasy 2. Like, if they were to truly remake this game in some way, that, you know, might be controversial with some of the fans, but maybe if they could shrink the dungeons down a little bit, I would not complain too much about that. But, you know, but like I said, I overall enjoy the experience. The odd leveling up system with the stats didn't bother me too much. I didn't really grind too much other than grinding Cure a little bit. Whenever anyone would get poisoned on my team, I would take 1 step, use Cure from the menu, take 1 step, use Cure, take 1 step, use Cure. That was really the only grinding I did, was just getting my white magic leveled up. Other than that, I did the quote-unquote grinding method of just never really running from any battles, except a few from the Flans. They annoyed me with having to use all that magic on them. And, but yeah, other than that, like I said, I basically just ignored the, I see people online talking about, if you use strategy, you can make builds. I'm like, I didn't do any goddamn builds. I just gave everyone I just hit optimum to give everyone the strongest equipment. I just bashed away. And yeah, everyone ended up with perfectly good stats to beat everything in the game, including the last boss, with no real trouble, except, like I said, getting killed from getting confused a couple times. But so the strange leveling up system didn't bother me too much, although I am ultimately glad that they discarded it, because, yeah, I definitely strongly prefer the classic system, right? Although I will give them credit for inventing magic points instead of the spell charges in Final Fantasy 1. You know, I like the lore stuff they came up with, like chocobos and dragoons, etc. But yeah, overall, leveling up each weapon and stat, not great, and I'm definitely glad they got rid of leveling up the spells one by one, because it would just be, it would suck if in later games, you know, if you only have like basically 1 or 2 useful black magic spells for each person, that'd be no good. So I'm glad they discarded most of that. But, you know, overall, maybe, I don't know, maybe I did enjoy this a little bit more than Final Fantasy 1. Partially just that it actually has a plot and characters, even if they're relatively minimalistic, at least it has them. So, yeah, and that did make a difference. And, you know, this is petty, but honestly, I might have enjoyed this more than Final Fantasy 1 because the music doesn't change every time you open the menu to mess with your equipment or use an item or whatever. That would just really annoy me in Final Fantasy 1 if you're, you know, enjoying the groove of the dungeon's music, and every time you hit the X to open the menu, you gotta suddenly listen to I was like, stop. Didn't like that at all. So, and this game got rid of it, and I'm quite glad. So maybe I did enjoy it more than FF1 just for that. Yeah, so I guess if you look at what this game did, some elements were dead ends, but it did introduce basically the concept of story and character to Final Fantasy, and some gameplay concepts, and is a stepping stone to other things. So, was it an amazing gaming experience? No, but it was pretty good. I didn't dislike it by any means. I probably would have enjoyed it more if I didn't binge play it so much for like the last 3 days I was playing. But yeah, it was you know, it was fun to play. I would say I liked it overall. So probably there will not be a Final Fantasy 3 review coming at any point in the near future, because you know, I'll be playing Tears of the Kingdom, and like I said, I prefer to only play for like an hour or so a day, so it'll probably take me quite a while to get through it. But once I do eventually, I'm looking forward to checking out FF3, Final Fantasy 3, because that will be another one that is more or less a brand new experience to me, so that should be interesting. And I'll talk JRPGs with y'all again later.